It all began with something I never imagined would happen. I found myself involved with my best friend's wife. Yeah, I know how it sounds. But it wasn't some random mistake after too many drinks. No, it was more like I'd walked into a trap. And by the time I realized how deep I was in, it was already too late. If I'm going to explain how I got here, I need to take you back to the beginning. Back when everything seemed perfect, or at least that's what I thought. Sophie was everything to me. I mean, when you marry someone, you expect to be together for life. We were together for over a decade, 6 of those years as husband and wife. And during all that time, she was the center of my world. Sophie wasn't just some trophy wife. She was stunning. Not only that, but she was sharp too. She had a confidence that made everyone around her feel smaller, and somehow, I was the lucky one who got to call her mine. I never thought I'd be talking about her like this, but here we are. Then there was my job. I work in financial consulting, which is a decent career, but it requires a lot of travel, nights alone in hotel rooms, and endless emails at odd hours. It never bothered me, though. Sophie always seemed to understand, or at least I thought she did. I figured, as long as I was bringing in the money and doing my part, everything would be fine. And then there was Ethan, my best friend from college. That guy could charm anyone. Women were drawn to him like moths to a flame, and he loved every second of it. But eventually, even Ethan said he wanted to settle down. He married Megan, a quiet, smart woman who seemed to balance out his wild side. I was happy for him. Ethan and Sophie got along just fine. The 4 of us together made life feel whole. You know how people say that if something seems too good to be true, it probably is? Yeah, I didn't see it coming. A few years ago, I stumbled upon Ethan's little secret. We were having dinner at my place, just like any other night. After the meal, while we were cleaning up, Ethan left his phone on the counter. A notification popped up. At first, I wasn't trying to snoop, but then I saw the message. Can't wait to see you tonight. It wasn't from Megan. One thing led to another, and before I knew it, I was scrolling through his texts, my stomach in knots. I found all kinds of stuff, flirty messages, secret meetup plans, and even pictures. Ethan was seeing a younger coworker, and I had all the proof. I confronted him right then and there. No sugarcoating. I laid it all out. Ethan tried to brush it off, but I wasn't buying it. I told him he needed to fix things with Megan, stop the affair, and get his marriage back on track. I swore I wouldn't tell anyone if he promised to end it. He agreed. I thought that was the end of it. Then came the night everything started falling apart. Ethan and Megan came over for dinner, just like before. Sophie was in the kitchen, and I was pouring drinks when I noticed something strange. Megan's eyes were locked on Ethan and Sophie, her expression tight, like she was holding something back. I figured maybe she'd had a bad day, so I didn't think much of it. But then she leaned in close to me and whispered, "Have you ever wondered if there's more between them than just friendship?" she asked. I laughed it off, trying to stay cool. But Megan didn't laugh. She looked at me dead serious and said, "I think Ethan is cheating on me, and I think it's with your wife." That hit me like a ton of bricks. My first instinct was to tell her she was crazy. That Sophie would never do that to me. And Ethan wouldn't be that reckless. But the way Megan was looking at me, it was like she knew something I didn't. "Just watch them," she whispered. "See how they are together." So, we both glanced into the living room, trying not to make it obvious. Were Ethan and Sophie sitting a little too close? Laughing a little too hard at some private joke? At first, I told myself it was nothing. They were just comfortable around each other. But then Sophie's hand brushed against Ethan's arm, and the way he looked at her, something about it made my stomach churn. "This isn't the first time," Megan whispered. Her voice so quiet it felt like a knife scraping my skin. "I think they've been meeting without us." My head was spinning, but I forced myself to stay calm. I didn't want to believe it. Sure, Sophie and I had our issues, like any couple, but cheating? No way. That wasn't us. But once Megan planted that seed of doubt, it was like a crack appeared in everything I thought I knew. And once you see a crack, you can't unsee it. After that conversation with Megan, I tried to push it all out of my mind. I told myself she was probably just projecting her problems with Ethan onto Sophie and me. But something shifted. That seed of doubt? It was like it started growing, And no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, it was already too late. Suspicion is a dangerous thing. Before I knew it, I was noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. Or maybe things I didn't want to notice. I started watching Sophie more closely. Every time she smiled at her phone, every time she stepped out of the room to take a call, it set me on edge. I began doing things I never thought I would. Checking her phone when she wasn't looking. Scrolling through her social media late at night, hoping to find something, anything. But there was nothing. Her phone was clean. Her social media looked normal. No secret photos. No hidden apps. No suspicious texts. At first, I felt relieved. But that relief didn't last long. If there were no signs, it didn't mean she was innocent. It meant she was really good at covering her tracks. And once that thought took root, I was done for. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, scrolling through her phone again, like a madman searching for something I must have missed. My mind started running wild, filling in the blanks where there were none. Every late text, every unexplained laugh. Suddenly, everything felt like a clue. And then there was Megan. She knew exactly how to keep me on edge. She started sending me these little messages. Just enough to fuel my suspicion, but not enough to give me any concrete answers. One time, I saw Ethan texting Sophie again. "Do you think they meet for lunch when you're at work?" she wrote. It wasn't loud or obvious, but it was enough to keep me tangled in doubt. Every time I told myself I was being paranoid, Megan seemed to push me right back into that spiral of uncertainty. I couldn't decide if she was genuinely trying to help or if she just enjoyed seeing me squirm. But at that point, it didn't matter. I was too far in. I needed to know the truth, whatever it turned out to be. Eventually, I decided to test it myself. Sophie mentioned she was meeting a friend in the city, and I acted like everything was fine, but instead of sticking to my usual routine, I cut out early and headed home. My goal wasn't even clear. Maybe I thought I'd catch them off guard. Maybe I just wanted to see if I could prove my gut right. I imagined Ethan's car parked outside, the two of them sitting too close, acting like they didn't have a care in the world. I didn't know what I was really looking for, but I had to see it with my own eyes. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dead quiet. No car in sight. No sign of anyone being there. It was just this oppressive silence that made my mind spin. I walked through the house like a fool, checking closets and corners as if I might find them hiding in some ridiculous way. But nothing. The place was as empty as it should have been. When Sophie got home later, I was sitting there on the couch, acting like I hadn't been walking through the rooms all afternoon, wondering what I was really hoping to find. She seemed surprised to see me at first, but it passed quickly. "Hey, I thought you'd be working late," she said, dropping her purse by the door. "Yeah, things wrapped up earlier than I expected," I answered, trying to sound casual. "How about you? How was your day?" She flashed me one of those smiles, the kind she always gave when everything seemed perfect. It was good. Stayed out a bit longer than planned, but it was nice to catch up. She shrugged like it was no big deal. I asked her where she'd gone, trying to keep the tone neutral, though every word felt like a weight in my chest. "You stayed in the city?" "Yeah," she said, breezing past me to the kitchen. "Just window shopping and a long lunch." I nodded along, pretending to buy it, but something felt off. The way she answered, so smoothly, too quickly. It wasn't natural. Or maybe I was just imagining things. Either way, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't being honest with me. Suspicion has a way of eating at you, doesn't it? It's like once it starts, it doesn't stop. It makes you question everything, even the smallest things. My mind was in a constant state of turmoil. Sophie and I were still doing the usual things, dinners, casual talks, and whatever intimacy we could scrape together. But it felt hollow, like we were going through the motions, each day just a little more empty than the last. Nights were the worst. I'd lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering where Sophie really went when she wasn't with me. Every time she smiled at her phone, every time Ethan's name came up in conversation, my stomach would twist. It was like a slow burn eating me alive, and all the while, Megan kept feeding the fire. She knew exactly what to say, how to plant just the right amount of doubt in my head to keep me hooked. One afternoon, she sent me a text. "Guess who I saw at the mall today? Ethan, and Sophie was with him." That didn't make sense. Sophie had said she was home all day. When I asked her about it later, she was calm, cool, like nothing had changed. Yep, she said, not even bothering to look up from her phone. Why? I tried to play it off. Just curious. But even as I spoke, I could feel my heart rate pick up. That was the thing about Sophie. She was too smooth. She could deflect anything with such ease that even when I was certain something was off, she made me feel like I was losing my mind for even thinking it. And Megan? She kept piling it on. She'd mentioned these chance encounters between Ethan and Sophie, always making sure I was in the loop. It was like she had me on a leash, pulling me deeper into my own paranoia, making sure I could never see things clearly. One night, I told Sophie I had a late meeting. She kissed me goodbye, said she'd be home when I got back, and went on about her day like everything was fine. But instead of going to work, I trailed her. I followed her car through the city, waiting to catch her in the act. I had this whole speech planned, ready to confront her with whatever I found. But there was nothing. She went to the grocery store. Just a normal shopping trip, eggs, bread, a bottle of wine. No secret rendezvous, no hidden meetings. Just the most mundane thing I could imagine. It didn't make sense. If she wasn't meeting Ethan, why did Megan keep saying they were together? Was Sophie really that good at covering her tracks? Or was Megan just messing with me? I couldn't figure it out. And the paranoia? It only grew. It didn't go away. It was relentless, gnawing at me until I couldn't take it anymore. One night, after Sophie climbed into bed next to me, I turned to her. My heart was racing. Sophie, I started, trying to keep my voice steady. Do you think Ethan's gotten too close to you? She blinked at me. Then her face twisted from confusion to irritation. What are you talking about? I shrugged, trying to sound casual. I don't know. It's just I've noticed how close you two are. Her eyes narrowed. For the first time, I saw something in them. Shock, maybe even anger, but something deeper, too. Jesus, Dylan. Ethan's my friend. That's it. What the hell is wrong with you? I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the way she reacted, so defensive, so over the top, didn't sit right with me. If nothing was happening, why get so angry? The doubts kept piling up, and I felt like I was drowning in them. That's when Megan invited me over for dinner. We cracked open a bottle of wine, then another. It didn't take long for both of us to get buzzed, the kind of buzz where inhibitions start to fall away. Megan leaned in, her voice low, seductive. If they're betraying us, why not do the same? What's the point in being loyal? At first, I laughed it off, but Megan wasn't joking. Her hand brushed against mine, and suddenly, the air between us felt charged. Hot. Come on, Dylan, she whispered. Don't we deserve something for ourselves? I wish I could say I walked away, that I stood strong, but I didn't. The wine, the frustration, the betrayal. It all mixed together until my mind went numb. One minute, we were sitting across from each other, and the next, we were tangled up on the couch, acting like we'd lost all sense. It was reckless, stupid, and dangerous. But at that moment, it felt like the only thing that made sense, like the only way to fight back against everything that had fallen apart in my life. Lying there afterward, I was a mess. Megan lit a cigarette, looking at me with that same smug grin she always had. We should record this, she said, so casually, like it was the most normal thing in the world. In case we need proof. I was too far gone, too drunk, to argue. I grabbed my phone, hit record, and let it capture it all. Our bodies, our anger, our betrayal. It felt like the ultimate act of revenge. But as soon as the rush of adrenaline wore off, the guilt hit me like a freight train. What the hell had I just done? I woke up the next morning, my head pounding, my stomach twisted with knots. For a split second, I hoped it was all just a nightmare. But then I turned my head, and there she was, Megan, lying next to me, looking like the cat who got the canary. The weight of what we'd done slapped me awake. I sat up, rubbing my hands over my face, trying to make sense of how everything had gotten so out of control. I knew it was wrong. I knew it the second I crossed that line. But it was done now. There was no turning back. Megan, though, seemed unfazed. She stretched, smiling like we'd just shared some kind of inside joke. "We need to show them," she said, her voice disturbingly calm. I stared at her, still groggy, the wine, and the guilt messing with my head. "Why? The video?" I croaked, confused and repulsed. She lit another cigarette, like nothing had changed. "It's time," she said. "Jesus, Megan, what the hell are you talking about?" I asked, my voice raspy. "We have to confront them, Dylan. They need to see what happens when they screw us over." I wanted to throw up. The wine, the betrayal, the shame. It all churned in my gut. "Megan," I trailed off, unsure of what to even say. "Yes, you do." She cut me off, her voice cold with certainty. "There's no going back now. They deserve this." I felt trapped, like I'd walked into some kind of nightmare, and now the walls were closing in around me. But the look in her eyes, the cold determination, told me there was no way out. She wasn't going to let me wriggle out of this. I was too deep. There was no clean way out. Despite every instinct telling me to stop, I nodded. The confrontation happened the next evening. Sophie walked into the house, the same calm, collected person she always was. I could barely hold it together. My palms were slick with sweat as I sat her down on the couch. "I need to show you something," I said, my voice brittle, flat. She raised an eyebrow, clearly annoyed. "What is this about, Dylan?" I pulled out my phone, my heart pounding, and hit play. The video flickered to life. A grainy mess of Megan and me, drunk, angry, desperate. I couldn't even bring myself to look at Sophie. I just stared at the floor, bracing for the explosion I knew was coming. When the video ended, the silence was deafening. I finally looked up. Sophie was sitting perfectly still, her face pale, her eyes wide. But there was no shock, no sadness, just pure rage. "You did this," she whispered, her voice low and deadly. I blinked, my mind still trying to catch up. This wasn't guilt I was feeling. It was anger, raw, explosive fury. "I never betrayed you, Dylan. Not once. And you did this?" She stood up, her face twisted in disgust. "You slept with Megan because you convinced yourself?" She didn't even let me respond before Ethan walked in, confusion written all over his face. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded. Megan wasted no time. "We know everything, Ethan. We know about you and Sophie." Ethan looked completely lost. "What the hell are you talking about?" Sophie rounded on him, her voice cutting. "She thinks we've been having an affair." Ethan's eyes went wide as the absurdity of it all hit him. "You think Sophie and I?" He shook his head, disbelief turning into fury. "Jesus Christ. Megan, you're insane." And then, the real truth came crashing down. Ethan turned to me, his jaw clenched. "You want to know what this is all about, Dylan? She's punishing me. Megan found out about my old affair years ago, and now she's dragged you into her little revenge scheme." Megan didn't even blink. "You deserved it," she said coolly. "I just gave Dylan a nudge. The rest was all him." The floor dropped out from under me. All those suspicious texts, all the drama. It was all part of her twisted game, and I'd fallen right into it. Sophie's laugh was bitter, cold. "You're pathetic, Dylan. You let her manipulate you into ruining our marriage, all because you couldn't trust me." I tried to explain, tried to apologize, but Sophie wasn't having it. "It's too late for that," she snapped. "You threw everything away." Ethan stood there, shaking his head, disgust written all over his face. "I'm done, Megan," he said, his voice final. "We're done." The fallout was brutal. Sophie and I filed for divorce within days. She couldn't forgive me, and honestly, I couldn't blame her. I'd let jealousy and paranoia rot everything we'd built. Ethan walked out of his marriage without a second thought, leaving Megan behind. I don't think any of us spoke again after that night. 2 marriages shattered. For what? Some twisted game fueled by lies and suspicion. After the divorce, everything felt like it had just collapsed into an empty void. I was left standing in the wreckage, trying to make sense of how the life I thought was solid had crumbled overnight. Sophie was gone. Ethan was gone. Megan, I didn't even want to think about her. And worst of all, I was stuck with myself, haunted by the choices I'd made. Choices that tore my world apart. The silence in my apartment was unbearable. Days blurred into nights. I'd sit on the couch, nursing a bottle of whiskey, replaying every fight, every lie, every missed sign. I tried to tell myself that Sophie had been innocent, that I'd ruined everything with my paranoia. But the truth? The truth was even worse. I knew I'd let my insecurities destroy the one thing I cared about most. You didn't know what, Sophie? I thought she was my forever. And I threw it all away based on a suspicion I couldn't even prove. The worst part was that Sophie had moved on so quickly. I'd catch brief glimpses of Sophie on social media, laughing, traveling, living a life that looked completely untouched by the chaos we'd gone through. Meanwhile, I was sinking. It was like she was fine without me, like I was just a brief footnote in her life. I, on the other hand, was left with nothing but regret, caught in a spiral I couldn't escape. Then, out of nowhere, I got the message. I was sprawled on my bed, mindlessly scrolling through my phone when the notification popped up. No sender, no subject, just an anonymous number with a string of photos attached. Something pulled me to open them, and there she was. Sophie, smiling, kissing someone else, all wrapped up in a moment with some guy I didn't know. The timestamps on the photos told the full story. These weren't recent. They were from years ago, right during our marriage. Sophie had been having an affair, and not with Ethan. My heart hit the floor as I swiped through the images, each one driving the truth deeper into my mind. This wasn't a fleeting mistake or some quick fling. This was a full-blown relationship. Dinner dates, vacations, hotel rooms. It had all been right in front of me the whole time, and I was too blinded by my own insecurities with Megan to see it. Sophie had been lying to me, playing me all along. I stared at my phone, my hands shaking uncontrollably as the weight of everything settled in. All my paranoia about Ethan. It had been nothing more than a diversion, a distraction from the real betrayal happening under my nose. Sophie had been leading a double life, and I had been too blind to notice. I thought I'd hit rock bottom before, but this was a whole new level of hell. Realizing that I had destroyed everything. My marriage, my friendships, while the real betrayal had been happening right in front of me the whole time. I felt like a complete idiot. After everything came crashing down, I just drifted. The person I once was seemed like a distant memory. Waking up in my empty apartment was suffocating. The silence felt like a weight pressing in on me from all sides. Every inch of that place was a reminder of what I had lost. The bed I once shared with Sophie. The kitchen where we'd spend hours laughing. The couch where we'd binge-watched movies on lazy Sundays. It all felt like a sick joke. I hated how familiar everything was, even though it was a past I could never get back. The days turned into an endless blur. I drank more than I should, barely slept, and spent hours scrolling through Sophie's social media, knowing full well it would only twist the knife deeper. Watching her live her life, laughing, traveling, living in the moment, while I was falling apart. It was like I was the only one who hadn't figured out we were supposed to move on. My apartment became a prison, and every minute I spent in it felt heavier than the last. One morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I threw together a bag, booked the first flight I could find, and left. No plan, no idea where I was going. Just a desperate need to get as far away from everything as I could. I figured maybe, if I just put some distance between myself and the wreckage of my life, I might be able to find some clarity, or at least a little peace. So, I traveled aimlessly, jumped between cities, countries, stayed in cheap hotels, lived out of a suitcase. I wandered through old streets, explored markets, drank at dive bars, sat alone in cafes, trying to piece together whatever was left of me. But the loneliness followed me wherever I went. It was in every quiet moment, in every silent pause. The pain didn't disappear just because I was somewhere new. It stayed with me, gnawing at whatever was left of my will to keep going. Then, one evening, I ended up in a small coastal town, the kind of place where the waves seemed to have a rhythm, rolling in like a heartbeat. That's when I met Rachel. She was sitting at the bar, nursing a glass of wine, staring off into the distance, lost in her own thoughts. There was something about her. Maybe it was the tiredness in her eyes, or the way she seemed so distant, like she was fighting some battle inside, that pulled me in. I wasn't looking for company, but somehow, I found myself sitting beside her, We started off with the usual small talk. Weather, the beach, what we thought of the local food. But there was an unspoken understanding between us, like we both carried some kind of invisible weight. It was the kind of thing you only notice when you've been broken yourself. As the night went on, the conversation turned deeper. Rachel opened up about her breakup, about how the man she had trusted with everything had shattered her. She said it wasn't the first time she'd been hurt, but this time, it was different. It was the one that drained her. As she spoke, I found myself nodding along, understanding every word. I had been there too. Hell, I was still there. I told her my story, though I kept some of the darkest parts to myself. I didn't mention the video or the full depth of the betrayal, but I let her know enough. I wasn't just some guy passing through. I was a man running from my past. Over the next few days, Rachel and I kept crossing paths. It wasn't planned, just random encounters on morning walks along the beach, at the same cafe for lunch, meeting up at the bar in the evenings. But it felt right. There was something easy about it. We didn't force anything. The silences weren't uncomfortable. She understood the things I didn't know how to say, and I started to realize I wasn't as alone as I thought. I was still cautious, though. I wasn't ready to trust anyone again, not after Sophie. But Rachel didn't rush me. She let me take my time. Little by little, I started letting my guard down. We shared more than just our pain. We talked about the future, about things we still hoped for, even if we weren't ready to fully believe in them yet. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, we sat together on the beach, our feet buried in the cool sand. The waves rolled in, steady and soothing, like a lullaby for tired souls. That night, I finally told her everything. Not just the outline, but the full story. The paranoia, the lies, the mistakes I made, and the fallout. I half expected her to pull away, to judge me for the things I'd done. But she didn't. She just listened. Her gaze steady, warm, kind. When I finished, Rachel gave me a small, sad smile. "We all make mistakes, Dylan," she said softly. "What matters is what you do next." It was like a weight lifted from my chest. I had spent so much time punishing myself, wallowing in guilt, looking backward instead of forward. But that night, something shifted inside me. I didn't know what the future would look like, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to find out. Rachel and I spent the next few weeks together. There were no labels, no promises, but it felt real. We weren't trying to fix each other. We were just two people, both broken in our own ways, learning how to carry our scars without letting them define us. When it was time to leave, I didn't feel that usual dread that comes with goodbyes. We exchanged numbers, promised to stay in touch, but there were no grand speeches. Just an understanding that whatever happened next, we'd both be okay. On my last night in that town, I sat alone on the beach, watching the waves wash away the footprints in the sand. The sky was streaked with orange and pink, the air thick with the salty scent of the sea. I sat there, just thinking. About Sophie, about Ethan and Megan, about who I used to be and who I hoped to become. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace. It hit me then. Life isn't about controlling every outcome. It's about learning to let go, to forgive yourself, and to trust that, even after the worst storms, there's always light waiting on the other side. I stood up, brushed the sand from my clothes, and couldn't help but smile to myself. There was still a long road ahead, and I had no idea where it would lead. But for once, that uncertainty didn't scare me. I knew I could take it one step at a time and rebuild. Life had torn everything apart, but it had also given me a chance to start fresh. And this time, I wasn't about to waste it. It's been about a year since everything fell apart and I left that town. I figured it was time for an update. Not because I have it all figured out now, but because things feel different, better, even. To be honest, for a long time, I didn't know if I'd ever get to this point. The weight of everything, the mess with Sophie, Ethan, Megan, the mistakes I made, had stuck with me like a second skin I couldn't peel off. But slowly, and with a lot of work, I started to shed it, piece by piece. It's not perfect, and there are still days that feel harder than others, but I've come to understand that healing isn't a straight path. Some scars are just going to stay with you, and that's okay. After leaving that little beach town, I moved to a city a couple states away. Nobody knew me there. No one knew my name or my past. It was a fresh start. I rented a small apartment, nothing fancy, just enough for me to live and build whatever life I could from the ground up. At first, it felt strange waking up every day without all the baggage weighing me down. But that quiet, the same silence that used to feel suffocating, started to feel peaceful instead. I learned to appreciate the stillness rather than fear it. Rachel and I kept in touch. We texted and called when we could, and even visited each other a few times. But we both knew from the start that we weren't meant to be anything more than a chapter in each other's lives. And that was okay. She came into my life at the right time, and I like to think I did the same for her. We still talk from time to time, mostly just to check in, say hi, and make sure the other person's doing all right. There's no drama, no hard feelings, just a mutual respect and gratitude for the role we played in helping each other heal. As for Sophie, I haven't heard from her since the divorce was finalized. I don't know if she's still with that guy from the photos, and honestly, I don't care. I've let go of whatever bitterness I once held toward her. It took a while, but I realized that holding on to that anger was only keeping me stuck. If she's happy, fine. If she's not, well, that's not my problem. I've got my own life to live now, and I'm focused on doing just that. Work's been steady. I found a consulting gig with a smaller firm, one that doesn't require me to work crazy hours or travel every week. It's been a great change. It's given me more time to focus on myself, to rebuild in ways I never thought I needed to. I've started going back to the gym, something I let slide during the mess of everything. It feels good to push myself again, to see progress in something as simple as lifting weights. I also picked up a few new hobbies. I learned how to cook for real, not just microwave leftovers. I've even started painting, though I'm not fooling anyone into thinking I'm any kind of artist. Still, it's been a great way to clear my mind. Turns out, there's something really satisfying about creating something, even if it's just for yourself. I've made new friends, too. I joined a couple of local groups, one for hiking, another for people who love music. And it's been nice to meet folks who only know me for who I am now, not who I was back then. I thought I'd miss having someone like Ethan as my best friend, but I've realized I don't need that kind of relationship anymore. I'm content with the friends I have now, people I trust without feeling the need to test that trust all the time. As for dating, yeah, I dipped my toes back in. Nothing serious yet, just a few casual dates. I'm in no rush. It's refreshing to get to know someone without the pressure to make it work. I've learned to be more honest with myself about what I want and what I deserve. So, I guess what I'm saying is that I'm okay. I didn't think I'd get here, but I did. Life's not perfect, but it's mine, and that's enough. I'm still figuring things out, still learning to trust again, still coming to terms with the mistakes I made. But every day feels a little lighter than the last. And that's more than I could have hoped for a year ago. I'm not the same person I was before everything fell apart, but I think that's a good thing. I've learned to let go of people, of expectations, and of trying to control everything. Life is unpredictable and messy, but that doesn't mean it's not worth living. Maybe that's the most important lesson I've learned. So yeah, I'm doing okay. Better than okay. Actually, I'm still here. Still standing. And for the first time in a long time, I'm actually excited to see what's next. Whatever it is, I know I'll be ready.